and I'd like to welcome all of you to the first guest talk in the Biology Webinar Series 2020, organized by the Institute of Biology. The Institute of Biology is the premier body of professional biologists in Sri Lanka, and the institute was formulated in 1981 and incorporated by an act of parliament in 1984. So if we take the objectives of the IOB, one of the main objectives is to promote and advance the science of biology in the country. So it is actually in this context that we annually organize a number of guest talks on various topics of biology. So this year, for the first time, we decided to go into an online format, and that is how the Biology Webinar Series 2020 was born. So before we start, I'd just like to make a few announcements. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the talk, and the questions will be taken from the audience. So those of you who are joining us today through the Zoom platform, you can type in your questions into the chat box, right? And I will take those from there. And some of you are joining us today through Facebook because we are live streaming on Facebook. So you can put in any clarifications you require through the comment section, right? So I will be looking at both the Zoom as well as the Facebook, and I will be taking questions and I will collate them and present it to our speaker at the end. Also, for those of you joining through the Zoom platform, I kindly request all of you to please switch off your microphones and also stop the video share so that all of us can have a much better online experience. I would also like to mention our sponsor today, the Bank of Ceylon, and they have been very generous in sponsoring this webinar series, and we gratefully acknowledge that. So coming to our guest talk today, it is on human-wildlife conflict, causes, consequences, and management strategies. So really pleased to have with us Professor Dewaka Weerakoon today. And though he is a very well-known figure in this field, I will just give a very brief introduction about him. Senior Professor Dewaka Weerakoon is attached to the Department of Zoology and Environment Science in the University of Colombo. He obtained his PhD in biological sciences from the Illinois State University, and he has been involved in the higher education sector as well as in research for well over 3 decades. His research interests include ecology and behavior of Asian elephants, the management of invasive alien species, and human-animal conflict management. Professor Weerakoon has received the Presidential Award a number of times, and he's also been the recipient of many local as well as international grants. He is currently serving on the Board of Management of the National Science Foundation and is also a member of the Asian Elephant Specialist Group of the IUCN. He is also a member of several special committees of the Ministry of Environment and Mahawali Development, and these include the National Species Conservation Advisory Group and also the National Experts Committee on Biological Diversity. So with that brief introduction, I would like to invite Professor Weerakoon to please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Eroja. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me share the presentation with you. Okay, I'm going to be talking about human-wildlife conflict because this is something that I have been studying for a long time. Just after I returned to Sri Lanka, having completed my PhD, this is the first project I started. I started looking at human-elephant conflict in the northwestern region of Sri Lanka, where we have the highest level of conflict. But over the years, I have also moved into other conflicting animals such as primates and so on. So, what I would like to do today is share with you some of my experiences as well as the findings of several of my colleagues with whom I collaborate over the years on this topic. What is wildlife, human wildlife conflict? What are the drivers or causes behind it? And what is the consequence of it, and what kind of management strategies that are available for us to combat this problem. Now, I became interested in this issue because I'm a conservation biologist, and many of the wildlife species that are in conflict uh, are also threatened species who are at the brink of extinction, and the conflict will drive them over the edge. But as I started studying it, I also became very sensitive to the plight of the human beings who are at the receiving end of the conflict. So, whether we look at it from the human perspective or the wildlife perspective, I think this is a problem that needs to be mitigated or resolved uh, as quickly as possible. So first of all, I would like to just give you a brief overview about the human-wildlife conflict, because when we say human-wildlife conflict, it has many manifestations. So I will just try to outline the different kinds of conflicts that occur between humans and wildlife. Now, when it comes to human-wildlife conflict, there are many definitions. Also, I think it is true that uh, depends on how we interpret the situation. Because, like, if I have few cockroaches in my house, it's not a human cockroach conflict. But if I have a troop of monkeys in my garden and causing damage to my roof and feeding on fruits in my garden, that might be interpreted as a conflict. So it is how we look at the conflict or how we interpret a particular incident as something that is within our control, in which case we probably refer to that as a pest situation, or if it is beyond our control, then it might be interpreted as a conflict. And it also depends on individual perspective. The picture you see here, uh, I, I'm not a very good photographer. You would surmise from this particular picture. I just took this from my balcony. You'll have to believe me when I say there are a couple of monkeys sitting on this roof, on my neighbor's roof. Um, Now, 10 years ago, all these three houses were not there. Neither was my house. So all these were open vegetated land, and this troop of monkeys used to travel freely in this area. But these houses came up over the last 6 7 years, and in case you are interested, this is what the monkey looks like. It's called the purple face langur. It's endemic to Sri Lanka, and it is one of the globally endangered primates. Now, um, once these buildings came up, their free movement was affected. They could not move from tree to tree. Therefore, now they have to use these roofs to move around. So from this roof to this roof, over to this, or using these electric wires, they will move parallel to the road, or they'll cross the road using uh, that are going across the road. Now, when these monkeys jump from roof to roof, it results in the roof breakage. So most of my neighbors consider this troop as a nuisance, a conflicting situation. But when it comes to, I feel very lucky to have these monkeys around. I really enjoy seeing them, really enjoy having them around, because not every day you will get a globally endangered uh, animal living in your home garden. So that's why I said it's an individual perspective. Some people may interpret as a conflict. At the same time, another person may see it in a different light. It depends on the level of tolerance we have and level of interest we have in wildlife. Nevertheless, when we say human wildlife conflict, we need to have some definitions. So I have chosen this particular definition that was coined during the World Parks Congress in Montreal in 2003, where basically defines the human-wildlife conflict is a situation that arises when the needs and behavior of the wildlife impact negatively on the humans, or when the goals of humans negatively impact with the needs of wildlife. Now, uh, whichever the way you look at it, it's a negative interaction between humans and wildlife. So neither party benefits from this interaction. And most of the time, both parties end up suffering from the interaction, which is why it is considered as a conflict. It's not a problem that only affects Sri Lanka. It's a problem that is affecting many countries in the world, both developing countries and developed countries. It also affects both rich and poor. However, the impact on the poor communities is much more pronounced, uh, whether it be a rural community or urban community, because most of these communities are vulnerable, and therefore their resilience to conflict is very low. And as a result, they suffer socioeconomically, psychologically, and so on. And that is also one of the reasons why this has to be resolved. And chances are, the way the human population is growing in the planet, in future, natural habitats are going to shrink even more, which means human-wildlife conflict is going to escalate as time goes on. So this is a problem. It's a global problem. It's an escalating problem, but it's a problem that we need to find solutions to, because this problem has both negative impacts on man and large number of wild species. So if we look at the different types of conflict that occurs, let me walk you through various manifestations of the human wildlife conflict. One of the main categories of conflict is conflict due to crop losses. This is considered as the major human wildlife conflict around the world, where various wildlife species will have an impact on crops grown by man. Now, there are various types of crops people grow. One of the main crops are grain crops. In Sri Lanka, it is rice paddy. So rice fields are affected by a variety of different animals. Some of them are insects, which are categorized as insect pests, but there are also other large vertebrates who has an impact on rice, especially grain-eating birds like the ones you see on the screen. This is scaly-breasted munia, which feeds on seeds, grains, etc. And what you see here is a flock of roostering parakeets. Now these birds are all flock forming birds. So you can see large flocks descend down on paddy when it is at the ripe stage, and they feed on the paddy seeds, which means the farmer will now have less amount of yield because they take away a significant portion of the crop. In addition to birds, rats also have an impact on paddy, and so does elephants. What you see here is a paddy field that has been impacted by or raided by an elephant. You will see that this paddy field is in very early growth stages. So elephants do not really feed on the paddy in this stage, but they simply walk through the paddy field, and you can see the footprints here. And as a consequence of them walking through the paddy field, much of the paddy field gets destroyed. But at the latter part of the paddy cycle, that is when the paddy uh, comes into bearing the seeds, elephants can be a major crop raider because they walk into the paddy field and they take a lot of the paddy from the field. Now, the difference between the birds, uh, rats, and the elephants is when you look at the birds, they may come in large numbers, but they eat very little. So they take only a certain portion of the crop. So the farmer does not feel a significant impact. Whereas when an elephant comes to the paddy field within a very short period of time, they may destroy the entire crop. So the magnitude of the problem is what makes this a conflict when elephants raid paddy fields, or in elephant raid this type of seasonal crop. In addition to seasonal crops like grain, there are various other crops which are affected by wildlife. Vegetables, again, especially things like peas, legumes, parakeets can cause fair bit of damage. And recently, we also have a growing problem with Indian peafowl or peacocks, which are expanding and causing significant damage to vegetable fields as well as paddy fields. Then there are tuber crops which are attacked by wild boars, porcupines, and then the fruit crops by fruit bats, monkeys, giant squirrels, flying squirrels. And when it comes to perennial crops such as coconut, again, a wide variety of wild animals can affect the coconut tree during the early growth stage, and also the mature coconut tree. So basically, if I sum up this, one of the main conflicts that arise due to impact of wildlife on various types of uh, crops that are grown by man, which results in loss of yield and therefore loss of income, and therefore it is considered as a conflicting situation. Now, the second type of conflict arises when the uh, yield is stored. Especially if you take paddy, the stored grain can be affected by a variety of animals. Once again, rats, mice, and also Asian elephants can cause serious damage to stored grain. As you can see in this picture, this is a house of a farmer that has been attacked by an elephant. Now, what farmers do is at the end of the growing cycle, they will harvest the yield and they will pack it into bags and they store it inside their house, in a house like this. Now the elephants can smell it, they will come and they will break the wall to get at the paddy. Now most of these farmers live in very small houses, so uh, basically what you will have is a multiple problem here. One, the house gets damaged, and therefore that is a significant problem to the farmer. And the second issue is there will be people sleeping inside the house. So when this wall collapses, sometimes little children or people who are sleeping inside the house might get suffocated or get injured due to the wall collapsing on them. So this kind of problem, this goes beyond attacking the stored grain. It also results in property damage and sometimes even death and injury to those who are living inside the house. Then a third kind of conflict occurs when wild animals attack uh, livestock or poultry or fish that are raised by people. One of the main examples for attack on livestock is by this species, Panthera pardus, or the leopard, can come and take small calves or maybe even medium-sized cattle from cattle growers. And then animals like these palm silvers or ringtail cats, they can be uh, they will be attacking poultry farms and take um, uh, the chicken that the farmers are growing, or birds like these diving birds like cormorants can uh, get into fish ponds and take fair bit of the fish grown by a fish farmer. So these kind of conflicts are also there where the wild animals will be affecting uh, an animal crop or livestock or poultry or fish that are raised by farmers. Then a fourth kind of conflict arises when this is mostly a conflict that takes place mainly in urban areas. Also in rural areas this can happen, because a lot of animals, wild animals, will try to live uh, or try to inhabit human habitations. As you can see here, this is a major problem in many parts of the world. Uh, This is a pigeon. Pigeons tend to come and roost in ledges or inside buildings. They defecate inside the building, and they cause fair bit of damage to infrastructure. This is another example. This is in the heart of the city of Colombo. The bird you see here is called a spot-billed pelican. A few years back, this was considered as a globally endangered threatened bird. At the moment, it is listed as a near threatened bird. Now, in Colombo, we have a fairly large population of spot-billed pelicans because there are lots of wetlands within the city of Colombo. And this tree, which is found in the heart of Colombo in a place called Vauxhall Street, is a fig tree that they have chosen to breed. So during the breeding season and also during the non-breeding season, you have a large number of pelicans uh, roosting and making nesting on this tree. And you can see it's a highly populated area, and these birds, because they feed on fish, their feces is very corrosive, so they defecate a lot, and people who live in the area finds it very difficult to coexist with this bird. So there has been many times people have tried to cut down the tree, but somehow this tree has survived. But this has created a major conflict in and around uh, the roosting site. Then there is another kind of conflict when certain wild animals come and try to dig burrows in our home gardens, like bandicoots, small rats, porcupines. These are all burrowing animals. So they come and dig burrows in the home garden, which destabilizes the soil, and sometimes sections of the home garden might collapse, and or they also affect the plants that we have in the home garden, and that leads to a conflicting situation. And then finally, the worst kind of conflict is when wild animals cause injury or death to people. Now, in Sri Lanka, we have four main types of animals that can affect human beings. One is, of course, the snakes. There are five uh, venomous snakes, and the number of mildly venomous snakes in Sri Lanka. And roughly about 400 people die due to snake bites annually in Sri Lanka. Also, there are few incidents reported where leopards or bear have attacked people, but it is not considered as a major conflicting situation because the incidents are few and far apart, and mostly bear attacks takes place inside the forest. So unless a person ventures into a forest, this sort of attack doesn't happen. However, leopards tend to come out of the forest and attack people, or may even move into human habitations looking for food, like dogs or other animals that they have, and that can lead to sometimes attacks on people. Then we have crocodiles. We have two species of crocodiles, the estuarine crocodile and the marsh crocodile. And crocodiles also uh, attack people, causing death or injury. Roughly about 5 to 8 deaths are recorded annually due to crocodile attacks. And then the most of the human deaths after snake bites occur due to elephant attacks. Roughly about 80 people die annually due to elephant attacks. And as you can see in this graph, this shows the number of human deaths that have happened during the last 10 years. You can see that it's just around averaging about 80. But what is alarming is if you look at the latter part of this graph, you can see the number of deaths are slowly increasing. Last year, it has reached 120. So what this graph tells us is that the conflict is escalating and more people are dying every year. And chances are, if we don't take sufficient measures, the numbers will increase in the future. Uh, and down here, what you see is the demographics of the people who are affected. The orange bars indicate males, the red bars indicate females. And when you look at this graph, it is very clear that males die proportionately more than females due to human attacks. And also, the age groups between 40 and 70 are the most vulnerable to uh, elephant attacks, because these are mostly farmers, and at this age, uh, they are uh, mostly engaged in farming in remote areas, and they have a very high probability of coming into contact with elephants when they go to the farm or coming back to their house after finishing their work. Uh, then I'm going to spend a little time talking about what are the causes behind the conflict, or what are the drivers, or what has contributed to this conflict to arise. So one of the main reasons is habitat loss. If you look at this series of photographs, you can see the green areas shows the vegetation cover from 1956 to 1999. Approximately 40% of the forest cover has been replaced by either agriculture fields or human settlements or other development activities. So this is a considerable amount of habitat loss, and animals who live in these habitats have one of two choices. Either they will have to perish, or they will have to adapt to human dominated landscapes, or to live in human dominated landscapes. And when human and wildlife coexist, there will be conflicting interests between the two parties, which has contributed to conflict. Then the second most important driver is habitat fragmentation. Let me illustrate this point to you using the next two slides. Uh, I'm going to show you enhanced satellite image of this area. This is in the northern part of Sri Lanka. For about 30 years, there was a civil conflict that was taking place here. In 2009, the conflict came to an end, which is followed by a rapid development process. Now, this is this is in 2006, before the culmination of the war, and you can see that the entire area is covered with forest. And you can see in the next picture, after the war, what has happened to that forest. You can see a lot of roads being developed, and there are homesteads established. So that forest has become fragmented into little forest pieces, and then this continues to get fragmented. So you will end up with bits and pieces of forest patches in a human dominated landscape. So this leads to um, a problem, because you have wildlife living within human landscapes, and therefore uh, uh, there is a higher probability of wildlife coming into contact with people, and some of these interactions may lead to conflicting situations. So just to another reason that can contribute to human wildlife conflict is poor land use planning. Because if you look at uh, the poor land use, if you look at these two pictures here, you will see that both pictures contain the same number of elements. But if you look at this picture here, you can see the elements are distributed in a very haphazard, random manner. Whereas in this picture, the same elements are now uh, distributed in a very planned manner. So what this picture basically tells you is, if we have good land use planning, we can achieve the same results, but in a more uh, planned and a more efficient manner. Because if you compare the two pictures, you see in this picture there are little forest patches in between human habitations. So these forest patches will be inhabited by animals who can have an impact on people. And if you look at the homesteads, they are scattered all over the place, so it's very difficult to provide protection to them. Whereas if you look at this picture, you can see the human habitations are all in concentrated areas, so we can protect them if necessary with electric fencing or various other management measures that are available. And at the same time, you can see the natural habitat is intact. You can see this river and the riverine forest. So this area can be inhabited by people, and also this can be used by corridors for animals to move without coming into uh, contact with the human beings. So basically the conflict happens when animals and human coexist. But if you can uh, plan the land in such a way that they can occupy the same landscape, but the chances of them meeting is minimized by proper land use planning, that can significantly contribute towards reduction of the human wildlife conflict. Now let me give you an example to illustrate my point. This is a study. What I'm going to show is a series of photographs of a herd of elephants that were satellite tracked by Center for Conservation and Research, headed by one of my colleagues, Dr. Prithviraj Fernando. So I'm going to present you 6 slides where this animal has been fitted with a satellite collar, and the collar sends a signal of the location of the animal every 4 hours. So what has been done here is data gathered per each time frame has been clustered, so we can show you a time series to show how the elephants behave. So let me explain the landscape to you first. This green area represents a small forest patch. So these are the green areas are all forest areas. The hashed yellow areas are paddy fields. The blue areas indicate water bodies, uh, basically tanks. And when you look at this picture, you can see there are paddy fields within forest, like here, small patches of paddy fields surrounded by forest. And if you look at this paddy field, you can see the right in the middle of the paddy field, you have a vegetation cluster. Now, this photograph shows all the data points we have obtained for this elephant herd at 12 noon. So you can see each black dot indicates a data point on a different day. So if you look at this animal, how it behaves, uh, at 12 o'clock, most of the time it is residing inside a forest patch. This is the only point where it has come out at 12 noon. But if you look at all these other points, it is inside the forest patch. Then at 4 p.m., you can see that the dots are slowly moving towards the periphery. And this is at 8 p.m. You can see the elephant is out here inside the paddy field raiding crops. Midnight, it has ventured even deeper into the paddy area. And then at 4 a.m., you can see they're retreating back to their uh, forest habitat, and by 8 a.m. they are back in the forest patch. So when you look at this series of pictures, you can see the typical behavior of a raiding elephant. They hide during daytime, raid during night, hide during daytime, raid during night. So this is going on day after day, and this is what is contributing to conflict. Now when they planned this landscape, if the paddy fields were all concentrated into one area, and if all the forests were protected here, then it is much easier to build an electric fence here and prevent the animals from coming into the paddy area. But the way it is now, if you try to build an electric fence around here, the forest patch is not large enough to support the animals, so they will breach the fence and try to enter here. So what we should have is, when we plan uh, a development project or a paddy field or a human settlement, we must, especially when it is going to be in a landscape where conflicts can occur, we have to make sure that we plan it in a such a way that you concentrate human use areas in one place and leave the wilderness uh, separately, so we can establish a clear boundary between the wilderness areas and the human use areas. That way we can protect the human use areas much more effectively than in a scenario like this, where the human use areas are scattered and surrounded by forest patches, and therefore this is a formula for disaster. And then uh, there are a number of other drivers like poor solid waste management, open dumping. Here is a classic example, this photograph was taken in the southern part of Sri Lanka, deep south. This is an open dumping area by the Tissamarama Municipal Council. So basically they come and dump all their garbage here, and animals get attracted to this because there is easy pickings. But in the process, animals are attracted to human use areas because these dumping areas function as attractors to not only elephants, large number of other wildlife. So uh, if we don't manage our solid waste properly, it can lead to this kind of situation, which will bring more wildlife into human use areas, which increases the probability of interaction, and some of these interactions, as I said earlier, can be negative and construed as a conflicting interaction. Then another reason that has contributed to conflict is the imbalances that we create in the environment, especially loss of predators. This is a classic population growth curve you can see in any fundamental ecology book. It defines how population behaves over time. So as you can see, initially starts increasing slowly, then it hits an exponential growth stage, and then it sort of levels off here because of some limiting factor. It could be space, it could be food, it could be water, but most of the time, these limiting factors are other controlling organisms such as predators, parasites, pathogens who operate on the population and prevent the population from growing beyond a certain point. But the way we are changing the environment, we are making it less and less conducive for some of the predatory species. Now, this can lead to removal of predators that are functioning as limiting agents of population growth of certain species, and when the predator is taken away, the population tend to increase again. So at the moment, one of the issues that we are facing in Sri Lanka is a massive expansion of this bird species, the Indian peafowl. One of the reasons uh, that uh, we believe that bird is increasing is because this has been, it's a medium-sized predator, the jackal. They predate on peacock eggs mostly. So when jackals have starting to disappear from many of the places where they used to be there 10, 15 years ago. In fact, jackals used to live in Colombo about 10 to 15 years ago, but they're no more. So what we see is predators like these medium-sized predators, who are very commonly found throughout the island, are now disappearing in many parts. So when the predator disappears, the controlling impact it had on populations that they're predating on, or the prey species, tend to increase in their population. And some of these prey species can have negative interactions with people and therefore can lead to conflicting situations. And then another thing that can contribute to human wildlife conflict is people themselves, because we tend to feed animals, wild animals. This is a classic case again in the southern part of Sri Lanka, near the near a national park called Yala National Park. This animal, uh, people used to feed the elephant because it uh, people used to feed the elephant because uh, it's a fun thing to do. But it has come to a point where the elephants has now got used to being fed by people, so it's demanding food. It stands by the side of the road, stops vehicles, and demands food. So this now, what has started as a simple thing has now become uh, a rather complex conflicting situation. Then uh, another thing that has contributed to conflict is poor design of development projects, where this is one example. This is a project, it's a major irrigation project that took place in the northwestern province. This entire area is inhabited by elephants, and what this project plans to do is provide water to increase cultivation. So if you're trying to increase the cultivation in an area which is already having a conflict, then we can expect that the conflict is escalate once the water is provided. So this is when you design projects like this, you have to be very careful, because if the project results in escalation of conflict, then the project benefits cannot be accrued, and as a consequence, uh, the investment will be wasted, and also it is going to create more social unrest. So when this project was planned, it was accompanied by a separate wildlife management plan, which has basically looked at the potential conflicting situations that can arise, and what kind of mitigation measures that can be taken before the implementation of the project, so that once the project is implemented, it will not lead to negative outcomes. So when we do development planning, we must try to avoid conflicting areas, developing areas that can lead to a conflict. But if there are no other options, the development plan should also be accompanied by a plan to deal with the potential conflicts that can arise due to the proposed development. Then there are a number of other drivers, such as rapid urbanization, loss of tolerance by people, a lack of understanding of the root causes that lead to conflict, especially when it comes to management. If we don't understand why the conflict had arisen, and if we try to provide management prescriptions to deal with it, we are most likely going to be ending up with poor results. Now, I think basically what I try to discuss during the second part is what are the reasons that have contributed, the different kinds of uh, phenomena that have contributed to development of a human wildlife conflict. The next few minutes I would like to spend talking about the consequence. What is the outcome of this? So, from a human point of view, there are a number of impacts. As I have explained to you earlier, crop losses is one of the biggest issues due to human wildlife conflict. And to prevent crop losses, farmers have to spend extensive hours, especially at night, guarding their crop, though that results in indirect impacts on the farmer, and their health will become poor due to overexhaustion and spending lots of time uh, in the farmland at night and not having sufficient sleep. And also, loss of life is another consequence of this. Loss of property, as I've shown you earlier, loss of social interaction. If you happen to live in a conflict area, especially if the conflict is caused by large animals like leopards or elephants or bear, then it is not safe to go out at night, because they may be lurking out there. Sometimes they may be in your garden, maybe they are waiting by the roadside feeding, and if you disturb them, they might get excited and attack you, leading to lots of deaths that we has occurred or caused by elephants. When we go and investigate, what we see is this is what has happened. A person walking at night, not seeing the animal, come into contact with it, and that can lead to rather dangerous outcomes. And then the other thing is, since most of the farmers have to spend the night away from the home, they have very little time to interact with the family. So basically, family interactions are constrained due to uh, crop guarding behavior that the farmers have to show. And also the psychological stress, because when you live in a conflict area, you have to live in constant fear of a potential attack by uh, wildlife. So that is not a good way to live, because when you live in fear for a long period of time, that causes stress and that leads to various other problems. Now, uh, these are only things that we directly see. But what happens to people when they are impacted by wildlife? We did a brief study where we tried to do a survey to see what happens to the family of the victim. So we've selected 74 families which were affected by elephants, where either the mother or the father has been killed by the elephant. And we try to track those families to see what happens to the family, because the thing that we see is the death of the person, but that death is going to be followed by other social changes in the family, which people generally don't see, because after the funeral it is forgotten, but the family has to live thereafter. And how do they cope up with this is the question that we try to ask. So this is the sample of 74 people that has died due to elephant deaths that we have selected for this study. And as you can see, I've shown you earlier also that uh, the elephant death, the humans that die due to elephants are mostly males, predominantly males. And predominantly, when you look at this diagram, you can see that most of the people who have died due to elephant attacks are farmers. There are a few other uh, categories, but you can see there's a clear distinction that 76% of the people that we have studied were farmers at the time of the death. And then we monitored the family for a couple of years to see what happens to the family once the mother or the father dies. So basically, out of the uh, and you will see that since males tend to die more more than female, the survivor would be the woman or the wife of the family. And only 2 out of the 68 women who lost their husband remarried. uh, the rest of them try to somehow support their family. However, when we take the other side of the coin, out of the 6 men who lost their wives, remarried, and they left their family. So, leaving the family to be looked after by the mother's parents or the grandparents. So, this is immediately what happens. And then over the long run, most of the mothers, because the the father has died, who happens to be the breadwinner most of the time. Now the mother will have to take over that role. So the mother will either have to switch to another livelihood or continue farming, but a lesser extent, because alone she cannot farm the extent that she used to. Or some of them try to look for foreign employment so that they can earn a little more money and come back and raise their families. And some of them depend on other assistance by their family members. And then when you look at what happened to the children, there's the 74 victims left behind 134 children. And we can see a distinct difference in the way the children respond to this. When you look at the boys, they become disobedient, they become very boisterous, difficult to manage, and most of them drop out from the schools. On the other hand, the girls become increasingly withdrawn, sad, and quieter. And most of these children, the education became disrupted after the incident. Um, they drop out of the school and try to look for the employment, and some of them support the family, some of them leave the family. And when it comes to girls, the older girls tend to drop out of the family and try to support the mother to bring up the family. So when you look at this data, what you see is it's not just the death of a person that we are dealing with. That death has very serious consequence on the family itself, uh, because they have to continue even after the death of the family member. Now, um, that is the human aspect. Now, when you look at the wildlife aspect, most of the animals that are causing conflict are threatened species. They are either globally threatened or nationally threatened. For instance, if you take the Asian elephant, it's a globally endangered animal. If you take purple face leaf monkey, the example I showed you about the monkeys that live in my home garden, they are globally endangered. Another type of monkey that causes conflict is the Macaca sinica or the talk macaque, which is also endemic to Sri Lanka and a globally endangered species. Leopards are globally vulnerable. Fishing cats, globally vulnerable. Giant squirrels are globally near threatened species. So all these species are causing conflict. Either they cause crop damage or some form of conflict with people. But you can see they are already globally threatened or nationally threatened species, which means they are at the brink of extinction. And the conflict results in people retaliating to this conflicting situation by killing these animals, which push them even further towards the extinction. Now, this photo was taken just a couple of months ago on May 29, 2020. What you see is a leopard that is trapped in a snare. I think for those who live in Sri Lanka, you may have all seen this picture in the newspaper or the web. Uh, what has happened is these leopards tend to come to human use areas either to attack their livestock or to take their pets like dogs or uh, maybe they are just traveling through human use areas between patches of forest. Now, people either to prevent them from taking their livestock or because of the fear that they might come into encounter one of these animals and that they may cause harm, uh, have set up snares to catch them. Now, you can see the snare practically catches them in the abdominal region, and this causes a lot of internal damage, and most of them don't survive. And this particular animal, you can see it's a dark morph of the leopard, which is a very rare case because both leopard and jaguar has a dark morph, which or what is referred to as the melanistic form. In the case of the leopard, the melanistic form is rare because it's controlled by a recessive gene, whereas in the case of jaguar, it is controlled by a dominant gene, so it's more common. Black panthers are more common among jaguars, but they're less common among leopards. And this animal, which is a fairly rare form of leopard, was killed by a snare attack. And this is the third melanistic leopard that was killed during the last 10 years. There is another colleague working on leopards in Sri Lanka. They have a trust called the Wilderness and Wildlife Conservation Trust. They're working on leopard-human conflict as well as ecology of leopards. And uh, I'm just going to show you some of the data that they have collected. They have recorded 79 deaths during the last 10 years. 42 of these deaths have resulted due to snares. And also, this is another alarming statistic. If you look at their records, they have recorded 47 leopards that were caught in snares, and out of that, 42 have died, which shows that if a leopard gets caught in a snare, the chances are it will not survive. And also, out of the 47 reported cases, 37 are from the central part of the country. So these kind of statistics should show us how we should approach management, because you can see snares are a serious problem, and this data also shows that snare use is prevalent in one part of the country. So we have to work with the communities in these areas to try to prevent them from using this, but provide them other solutions to the conflict. So the reason why these kind of statistics are collected, so that we can concentrate our management on specific areas or specific aspects that is causing the conflict. And also, there are records of leopards being poisoned because leopards, their feeding behavior is such that they will catch a prey, feed on it partly, and then they hide it so they can come back and feed on it on few subsequent days. So what the farmers do is they will catch they will find the prey that the leopard hides and put poison into the prey item. So when the leopard comes for the second feed, it will get poisoned and it will die. So uh, this is is another consequence of conflict, because when people are affected by wildlife, they return or retaliate back in a very negative manner. When it comes to elephants, you can see the situation is even worse. These are the elephant deaths that have been reported by the Department of Wildlife Conservation during the last 10 years. You can see 10 years ago, the deaths were somewhere around 200. If you go back another 10-15 years, it was even less. But once again, we see a very alarming trend. If you go through this graph, you can see there is a significant increase in the number of deaths. If you compare 2010 and 2019, the number of deaths have almost doubled. So basically what this shows is the conflict is escalating despite a lot of money being spent, a lot of management actions have been taken. Still the conflict is escalating year after year, which means we are not making any headway in solving this problem. Once again, the number, if you take 2019, the number of elephant deaths are somewhere around 400. 400 may be a small number if you just look at the number. But when you look at the death rate, you have to look at it as a function of the total population size. Now, if you take the human population in Sri Lanka, 400 out of 21 million is a very small proportion. But when you take the elephants, there are roughly about 6 to 7,000 elephants in Sri Lanka. So 400 deaths per annum constitutes to about 6% of the population dying annually. Now, also, if you look at the demographics, more than 80% of the elephants that are dying are male elephants. So we can assume that this will have a significant impact on the population structure as well as the population size in years to come. So these are the consequences of human-wildlife conflict. Both parties are affected, both parties are negatively affected by this, and if we do not take action against that, things are going to go out of control. So this is where the management comes in, which is the last segment of my presentation. So the management of human-wildlife conflict, the focus is to reduce the potential for conflict. So we can use a variety of different management techniques. Some are very passive, non-intrusive methods. Some management methods are intrusive and very active. So basically, we can divide management approaches into two different categories. There are traditional methods, which the main focus is to stop or minimize conflict by controlling the animal population. So uh, things like culling, reducing the population size by selective culling of certain individuals of the population, or catching and translocating problem-causing animals, or driving a proportion of the wild animals that are causing the conflict away from the conflict area into a protected area or a safe area, and other population control methods such as use of contraceptives, etc. These are the traditional approaches for management. Then the modern methods involve uh, more ecology and behavior based methods to modify uh, the behavior of the animal that is causing the conflict, to reduce the interactions with human, because it is the interaction that eventually contributes to the conflict. So let me give you some of the information about what sort of management has been tried out and what are the outcomes of it. Now, with respect to elephants, which are the animals that are causing the highest level of conflict in Sri Lanka, we have established a large extensive protected area network. Nearly 15% of the country has been set aside for protection of elephants. But we find that more than 50% of the elephants are not inside these protected areas that have been established for the conservation of elephants. Now, if we try to understand why this is happening, I think again it shows that our management is not supported by good science. Uh, Allow me to illustrate my point. Now, in Sri Lanka, we have a very ancient cultivation system called chain or slash and burn cultivation, where a farmer will go, clear up an area, burn the vegetation, cultivate, and at the end of the cultivation cycle, he will abandon the land. So the land will slowly grow back. First the grasses come, then the herbs, and then bigger trees. So it will slowly begin to regenerate, and maybe after 4 or 5 years the farmer will return back to that plot, clear the vegetation, burn, and then cultivate and allow it to fallow. So it's a constant cycle of burn, cultivate, and fallow, which prevents this uh, landscape to proceed beyond this point, because the farmer will come back and then restart the cycle. However, uh, most of the protected areas that are in Sri Lanka that have been established for elephants have been managed under this cycle by farmers before the area is declared as a protected area. So the moment an area is declared as a protected area, this kind of activity is not allowed. So this cycle is going to be broken and replaced by another cycle, which is called ecological succession. So if you look at a land that is managed under this chain or slash and burn cycle, it creates a landscape like this. And studies done on elephant carrying capacity for this kind of habitats have shown roughly about one elephant per 33 hectares. That is the density of elephants that this kind of landscape can support. So we take a landscape like this, we declare it as a protected area, and we take the man out, and we stop the slash and burn cycle, and uh, that is what we have done in all these green areas. So the moment you remove the slash and burn cycle, another cycle comes into force. That is what we refer to as the natural succession in ecology. So basically what happens is this is now going to continue to the next level of succession, which is the forest. So basically this is the type of habitat that the elephants like. Forest does not support high numbers of elephants. Studies done in this kind of forest habitat shows that the carrying capacity is about one elephant per 500 hectares. So if I may go back 2 slides, before the declaration of the protected area, the carrying capacity is about one elephant per 33 hectares, and the way we manage the protected area results in the reduction of carrying capacity over time as the natural succession proceeds, where now the same landscape can support much or fewer number of elephants than it used to support previously. So what we have done is we have established protected areas for conservation of elephants, but we have managed the protected area in such a way that the protected area become increasingly less desirable for elephants. Therefore, they have to go outside the protected area where they can find the habitats where the farmers are continuously engaging in slash and burn cultivation. So this again shows that when you try to, if you do not understand the root causes of the problem, and if you try to provide management prescriptions, it is not going to uh, help, because eventually the management will fail. Then there are a number of other things that uh, is being done. Again, I'm using elephants as an example because most of the management has focused on elephants. but some of these management prescriptions also apply to other wild animals that are in conflict, and when it does, I will also point that out. So this is another management prescription for preventing human wildlife conflict, specifically human elephant conflict, by erecting electric fences. In Sri Lanka, we have about 3,000 kilometers length of electric fence, and uh, uh, they are basically psychological barriers. The elephant can breach the fence if it needs to. It's a fairly costly thing, and the fence is only the end of the beginning. Once you have a fence, it has to be properly maintained in order for it to be an electric fence, working electric fence. But when we go and monitor many of these electric fences, this is the state that we find. You can see this, the post has fallen over, so the electric fence will no longer be functioning properly. Or it is in the middle of a forest, and the vegetation will grow and they will come into contact with the wires, and therefore the wires become earthed, and therefore the resistance increase in the fence, and therefore the voltage drops, becomes again an ineffective fence. Now, this is another problem we are facing. About 50% of the fences are in the wrong places. Now, if you look at this particular picture, you will see the problem that with this fence, because a fence is apparently used to have elephants on one side and people on the other side, so that the elephants cannot affect the people. But when you look at this fence, you can see there are elephants on this side and there are elephants on this side. So this fence practically has no uh, purpose. But if you look at the root cause of this thing, the why this fence has been put in this place is this happened to be an area managed by Department of Wildlife Conservation, and this happens to be an area managed by the Department of Forest Conservation, and this is the boundary, which is an administrative boundary which elephants do not recognize. They only understand ecological boundaries. So having the fence in an administrative boundary create lots of problems. If I may illustrate my point, here is a schematic depiction of that same situation. So here is one forest area, here's another forest area. This fence is in the middle of the two forest patches on an administrative boundary. Now, this is the human use area. So elephants are on both sides of the fence. Elephants on this side of the fence will come into human use areas and cause conflict. Now, if you can rearrange this in this way, if you can shift the electric fence from the administrative boundary to the ecological boundary, the elephants can continuously use the forest area, and the people can continuously use the human use area, and they can coexist without coming into conflict. So this sort of poor management has resulted in escalating conflict situation. Then another thing that is being done is translocating problem animals. We translocate elephants, crocodiles, monkeys, all kinds of conflicting animals are caught and translocated. And the Center for Conservation and Research has monitored 17 of these translocated animals using satellite collars, and I do not have time to go into each and every case, but I will give you a summary of the findings. So out of the 17 animals that were translocated, 3 have returned back, 14 have moved into Forest Department managed areas, and from there they have come out into other areas and started causing conflict. 5 of them had to be shot, and they have also caused deaths to 7 human beings. So basically, you had a conflict here, you captured them, and you translocated them into a forest patch, but they have come out and started causing a new conflict in the place where it has been translocated to. So that is basically the conclusion we can derive from this, which shows that translocations do not work most of the time. And then another thing that has been tried is driving large numbers of elephants away from human use areas. Here is a classic example that happened in the southern part of Sri Lanka. You can see this area uh, has been developed in recent times under this reservoir project. But before the development took place, the area also supported large number of elephants. So the development agency requested that these elephants should be removed from this area because otherwise it will lead to a conflict. Now the conservation biologists uh, basically proposed that these elephants in this area should be pushed into the adjacent region, which is a forested area, uh, which has very few human habitations, and the development area is protected with an electric fence. However, the Department of Wildlife Conservation was of the view that there were only few elephants here. Therefore, their plan was to drive all these elephants into a nearby national park called the Lulubambera National Park. So they did not listen to the concerns of the conservation biologists. So they undertook a drive to push these elephants into the park. Now, what happened was the first drive, even though they anticipated there were only 60 elephants, they ended up driving 225 elephants into Lulubambera Park. And most of the elephants that were driven are herds, females with little ones, as you can see in this picture. The male elephants, who are the main culprits who create conflict, since they are living alone or in bull groups, have managed to escape the drive and stay behind. So at the end of the drive, when they went and looked at the area, they found there were nearly 400 more elephants that have left behind. So there was a second drive. Uh, to drive some of them also into Lulubambela. So CCR again managed to put a collar on one of the elephants that were driven into the park to see what has happened to the driven elephant. So this is the Lulubambela National Park. This is the boundary. They were driven from this area to here. This entire area is national park. There's another national park here. So the expectation was if you drive them here, they will distribute in this large forest area and live happily ever after. But what the telemetry data showed is that the elephants, at least the herd that were tracked by CCR, did not behave the way they were expected to behave. They continue to hang around near the boundary and try to get back to their original home range. Now, what has happened is elephants are large animals. So when a large number of animals are restricted to a small area like this, they will eventually run out of food. At the beginning of the dry season, you can see the signs on the elephants. Their body condition was going down, and towards the end of the dry season, they were basically walking dead. At that dry season, at the end of that dry season, large number of elephants died. So what this drive has accomplished is driving a large number of non-conflict causing animals into their death, and it's a very gruesome death that they had to uh, encounter inside the Lulubambera National Park. So once again, what these examples show you is that most of the traditional approaches do not work because they are not based on proper science. So even what our data shows is that these things have to be avoided. But even though this data has been presented over and over again to the managers of this conflict, they continue to pursue these same management approaches and getting the same results. So what we really have to do is we need to change our approach. We have to invent new methods rather than try to continue to follow failed methods such as behavioral modifications, uh, to reduce interactions with people. So a new approach has been tried out by Center for Conservation and Research. Instead of putting fences around protected areas, what they have suggested is to protect the villagers and their crop fields by having permanent fences around their villages and temporary fences around their crop fields, such as you can see here. So you can see this is a village fence, which is a permanent fence which prevents the animals from coming into their living area. This is a crop field, a paddy field, where they will place the fence at the beginning of the cultivation season, and once they take the crop, they will remove the fence and during the next cultivation season reset it. So once they remove the fence, you can see elephants come into those paddy areas to feed on what is left behind. So uh, we have a situation here where the elephants are prevented from coming to the crop field during the cultivation season, but after the cultivation season, elephants are given access to this field so they can uh, uh, have a fairly good nourishment in this kind of habitat. Um, so what you see here is one such fence is being built. So once again, in the past, the fences have been built by the government. Now in the CCR model, they try to get the villagers also involved in it. Either they have to give money or they have to give their labor. So there is some buying in on the fence, and they also have to do the maintenance of the fence. So this particular approach has worked very well over the years. Most of these fences have been properly maintained, and they have managed to protect people and their crops much more effectively than the fences that have been used before. Now, there are a number of other things that we can do. We can reduce the attractiveness of the villages by growing plants that elephants do not prefer. Also, uh, this is another new thing that the wildlife department has tried, which is instead of translocating them into forest patches, translocating them into fortified holding facilities so that they cannot escape from there. But unfortunately, the monitoring shows that this is not working properly. Again, most likely due to design failures rather than the concept. So once again, the fortified holding facilities should be looked into and developed further. And once again, we see the problem is that the scientists and the managers are not communicating well enough so that they can together find ways to solve this problem. And also there are another number of other things that can be tried, such as crop insurance. And one thing that is really needed is realigning the current electric fences into ecological boundaries, as I've shown you earlier. And at the moment, we are also trying something new, which is virtual fencing. Here, we are trying to use technology that has already been used for training dogs. This, what you see here, is a dog wearing a dog collar. Now, what this dog collar does is it defines a virtual boundary, and when the dog reaches that boundary, it emits a warning sign. If it continues, it gives a little electric shock. If it continues, it will give a slightly higher shock until the dog turns back. Now this works very well. Within a very short period of time, they learn to understand or associate the noise with the shock, and when the noise comes, they turn back. So you can establish virtual boundaries uh, on a landscape. Now, the same technology now has been used by Australian cattle farmers, where they, instead of having to herd the cattle, they are putting these kinds of electric collars on the which are called aversive geofence collars, because the collar has the ability to communicate with the satellite. So the collar knows exactly what coordinate it is in. So basically, if you draw a line, then the collar will compare that coordinate with the virtual line, and when it comes close to that, it gives a warning, and if the animal continues to walk, it will give an electric shock. So using this method, now basically a farmer can draw a line on his iPad, sit on his uh, porch and control how the animals move. They can move them from one grazing area to another by simply realigning the line. Now, this is very powerful technology because realigning a physical electric fence is a very costly process. It's a very labor consuming process. But what has happened here is instead of having a physical fence, the fence is now on a collar that is attached to the animal, so we can control the mobility of the animal by drawing a virtual line on a mobile phone or an iPad or some device that we hold in our hand. So we can practically control it. So that way we don't have to put fences like the ones that I've shown you earlier. Like if you want to protect a crop field, we draw the line around the crop field. But the question is, how many elephants that we have to put the collar on. So in Sri Lanka, if we look at it, we probably have to put this collar on at least about 1,000 to 2,000 elephants, but it's still much more cheaper than building thousands and thousands of kilometers of fence. And with this, we can allow them access to certain areas during certain period of time, or prevent them from going during the cultivation time. So it gives us lots of flexibility. So this is still at a very early experimental stage. One of my PhD students are working on it, and we are having some reasonably good results, and we are hoping that maybe within a year or so that we can develop this collar and adapt the same technology to control movement patterns of elephants. Um, and then uh, I also think that this is a solvable problem, but we need some serious paradigm shifts in how we do things, especially how we do land use planning at a national scale. Because if we can get the land use planning done properly, it can reduce potential conflicts to a significant level. And also, when we design development projects, once again, we have to try and avoid conflict areas, or try, if it is in a conflict area, we have to have mandatory plans to minimize human wildlife conflicts, so people and wildlife can coexist with minimum impact on each other. And we also have to have proper solid waste management approaches. Open dumping should be strictly avoided, and we even removal or disposal of garbage in urban areas have to be properly managed, so they don't function as attracting attractions for wildlife. Also, we need to have a more aware general public, so they will be able to, they know how to deal with conflict, and also they will have increased tolerance towards wildlife, so that the interpretation of the conflict can be changed. And we also need to work on better urban planning, because in Sri Lanka we still have large number of wildlife living in urban areas. However, the way we are expanding our urban areas, we come more and more into conflict with them. But with proper urban planning, with more greener areas to support wildlife, we might be able to establish the needed separation. Although we are using the same landscape, the wildlife and people will have less of an interaction. And also, we have to start thinking about how to restore natural population regulation processes, like how do we reintroduce predators to some areas. Again, it has to be properly planned, because it may lead to other problems. And what is most important is that there's a lot of information. People like me, there are a lot of my colleagues who are working in these areas. We have gathered lots of information that has to be integrated into management. But unfortunately, even though we are trying very hard to convince those who are managing, much of our data are not utilized, and therefore the management efficiency that we expect is not there. And that is one of the reasons uh, why these conflicts are escalating. But above all, most of the wildlife-human conflicts are caused by large-ranging animals, or large populations of animals affecting large areas. So these are not things that can be solved easily. It needs a national level commitment, and it needs a lot of political commitment, uh, political support, in order for us to implement a lot of these things, because we need to have a number of policy level changes which can only happen at a very high level. But the bottom line is, having studied human wildlife conflict for a long period of time, I feel hopeful that this is a solvable problem, but it needs a lot of commitment and a lot of uh, uh, effort. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I hope I have managed to give you an overview about the wildlife-human conflict and the causes and what sort of solutions are out there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for that very comprehensive overview of this particular problem. We have a number of questions for the Q&A session. Shall we start that, sir?
Okay.
So I have actually taken down the questions through the chat. Some of them are somewhat similar, so I'll just pose those for you. Many of them are to do with elephants, right? So we had one question. Do you believe that elephants in Sri Lanka can be retained inside protected areas?
The answer is no, because like I pointed out, the protected area network has a very low carrying capacity for elephants. That is why more than 50% of the elephants are at present uh, living outside the PA network. So if we are to contain the current elephant population into the protected area network alone, we will have to at least halve the number of, maybe we can probably have about 1,000 to 2,000 elephants. So what do we do with the rest of them? If you take the example of the Lulugam Mera drive I've shown, if we drive all the elephants into protected areas, what will happen? Vast majority of them will die, and the remaining ones will live in the protected area. Sometimes even the actual carrying capacity will be affected, because when you put a large number of animals, they will cause a lot of habitat destruction. So even the ones that can survive in the protected area will now not be able to survive. So I think if we are to take that particular option, it's going to be rather disastrous for elephants.
Right, thank you, sir. And also regarding translocation, so there were two queries on that, whether you think translocation is effective and justifiable. And another audience member had mentioned the fact that large animals such as elephants, leopards, or crocodiles, because of their learned behavior, they return to their home grounds. So what would be a viable solution as an immediate response without going into the option of translocation?
Yeah, like now, I unfortunately, because of the time limit, I did not have time to show some of the detailed results of those animals that were tracked. But based on now, Center for Conservation and Research has tracked about 17 elephants so far. Many more have been translocated, but uh, I think we can assume that this represents a fairly sizable sample of the translocated animals. And what the results show is that a lot of elephants have at least a fair number comes back to the original place. Some of them seem to have a very strong homing instinct. Others, if you translocate them too far away from their original location, they might not be able to come back to their original location, but they will go into other human use areas and cause conflict. So translocation based on the available data seems to be not working. So as a solution, what the Department of Wildlife Conservation has done is they have established what is called a stockade. That is an area that is covered by two electric fences. So the trouble causing animal is translocated into the stockade, and the idea was to prevent them from leaving the translocated location by having a strong electric fence. However, there were certain issues about the design of the stockade and the way they are doing it, and the data uh, are, all the data are not available because the department is monitoring them, but some of the information that were presented recently shows that many of the animals are breaking out of the stockade. So the stockade approach might work if we can contain the animals within that stockade area. So I think that's a management option that needs to be looked into in greater detail and fine-tuned, so that at least we can contain some of the trouble conflict causing animals within a protected area, within a defined area of a protected area. Otherwise, if you just simply go and release them in a protected area from where they can walk out, they might we're just translocating the problem from one location to another.
Yes. So there's another question regarding culling.
Mhm.
Culling is an accepted method of controlling problematic animals. However, the general public is usually against. And also, there was another question regarding the peacocks, the issues with peacocks and protection on culling. But due to this public sort of perception against culling, is that a viable option, or is anything being done in this particular area?
In Sri Lanka, we don't practice culling. It is something that has been practiced in many African countries. It's not just random culling. They are identifying which animal to be taken down, and so it's a highly regulated process. Even in countries like North America, there is a hunting season. So the idea is, I mean, if the predators are not there, controlling the population by human beings. But unfortunately, I think culling is not an option that we can consider in Sri Lanka because of the cultural and the religious beliefs of the people. It may go against it. So culling has never been tried out. But if you really look at what is happening in the ground, they are culled. I'm not showing you data. The data I've shown you is that 400 elephants die annually, and all of them are not dying natural deaths. They are either shot by a shotgun, or they are poisoned, or people use nail boats. They use a variety of ways to kill elephants. And none of these are humane, because if an elephant is uh, uh, hit by a shotgun, it will crush its leg, which means it cannot walk, and the leg will develop gangrene, and it will take days, sometimes weeks. The elephants will be stationary, so they can't feed, and eventually they starve to death. So that is a form of culling, although it's informal. People just ignore the fact that elephants are being killed by farmers intentionally or unintentionally. But we are killing 400 elephants, not the government, but various people. And it's a question of how you interpret these results. But there is no formal culling, but also there's an issue with culling because I've shown you a population curve. If you cull a population, it brings the population into the exponential growth. It pushes the population back to the exponential growth phase. So a lot of times people studies done elsewhere where culling has been practiced shows that after a few years after culling, the the wildlife population goes back to the original level. So you have to have continuous culling if you want to use that option. But to answer your question, it's not something that has been tried out or considered in Sri Lanka. Now, with regarding to peacocks, uh, again, the, the main theory is that loss of predators is the main reason why we are having a population explosion in peacocks, which is accompanied by expansion of their distribution, range expansion. So we see peacocks now where we have not observed them before, especially in the wet zone of Sri Lanka. Uh, so their population will have to be controlled. That is the only way you can do it. One way to approach it is try to restore the predator balance, maybe by introducing predators after proper planning into few areas where they can naturally control the population. But again, this has to uh, first be done experimentally, and if we see good results, it can be upscaled into other areas, but it has not even been tried yet.
Right. Thank you, sir. Can you take a few more questions, sir?
Yeah.
So there's another question regarding problems with monkeys. Um, the influx of monkeys to urban areas, particularly in the central province? Is there a reason for this? And also, is there a solution?
Pardon me? I'm sorry, Raja, I didn't get your question.
It's regarding monkeys.
Yes.
Whether increasing the monkey population, particularly in the central province, and also is there a solution regarding problems caused by them?
Lot of the, I think basically we have two monkeys that are causing conflict. One is the macaque or the talk monkey in the dry zone and the central province, and in the wet zone, especially in Colombo and its suburbs, is the purple-faced langur, which is also an endemic animal. Now, the reason that has contributed to uh, the talk macaque problem, once again, people discard food in a unmanaged way, which has created more feeding opportunities to them. Any population, again, if you go back to fundamental ecology, population control is either by predator, prey, or pathogen, or availability of food, or space, or water. But if you increase food, most of the time is food is a limiting factor, and also predators can control population. So if you make food available more and more, either by open dumping of garbage or disposal of food waste in an unmanaged way, that will lead to more feeding opportunities, which means they will reproduce more, which means there will be a population explosion. I think with macaques, what we see is that, but all the macaques are not the same. There's been a lot of work done on macaques, and there are number of subspecies, especially the mountain subspecies is very rare. It is the dry zone subspecies that is common and increasing in population. So again, controlling them can be done by preventing feeding of wild animals. I've seen a lot of times when people go on pilgrimage or trips, uh, they will have lunch at a nice place, and then whatever remaining they'll dump on the side of the road and go. And the monkeys will come and feed on it, and that eventually goes on to increase the population size. So I think we'll have to control a lot of these things, how we dispose garbage, how we dispose food waste, to create a lot of awareness among people. Through that, maybe we can have some effect. And also it has been tried whether we can do uh, use contraception to slow down the growth of monkey populations. And there has always also been an attempt to translocate some of the monkeys from problem areas into wilderness areas. So a few things have been tried out, but still there is no lasting solution to the problem, because what we really need to have is for each conflicting situation has different reasons. So you can't apply the same prescription for each and every problem. So for each conflicting human wildlife conflict, we have to have a separate plan where we use the available scientific data to understand why the conflict has arisen, what are the drivers that are contributing to it, and work on those to try to remove them so that we can try to uh, reverse the conflict slowly over a long period of time. That is the type of planning that is needed. Uh, but at the moment, some of that work is being done. But I think we have to go a long way if we really have to seriously uh, control the conflict in this country.
Thank you, sir. There's another question on giant honeybees
Uh-huh.
that they have led to many attacks as well as some deaths, particularly within the plantation community.
Uh-huh.
Are there remedial actions taken in this regard?
They have, I think they have always been there, because in the mountain area, in most wilderness areas, you can see them. Um, the main thing is, I think a lot of them don't generally attack people unless they are provoked. the honeybees tend to show excrete various pheromones. If one is crushed, then they send a pheromone that is an aggregation pheromone. That is what prompts the attack on the person who crushes the honeybee. So I think on one side we'll have to um, do a bit of awareness among people who live in areas where there can be uh, conflicts. But honeybees also perform a very important ecosystem service, which is pollination. So I think that's why I said, although these animals are causing conflict on one side, on the other side, they are performing services that we really need. So we can't simply uh, destroy an animal just because or try to eliminate an animal because they are causing conflict, because that elimination will lead to another imbalance which may lead to even bigger problems. So that is why a lot of these are, again, if you look at as conflict goes, that's why I said conflict is how we interpret things. So if one or two people are attacked by giant honeybees, I don't know whether that can be interpreted as a significant conflict. uh, Maybe it can be a problem that is solved regionally by taking some management actions. But if it is a recurrent event, then I think we'll have to have a much more concerted effort. But as far as I have come to see, uh, there aren't very many attacks. Most of the time, these things happen when people go into the forest to collect firewood or hunting or something, and they may disturb a honeybee colony, or maybe accidentally crush one of them, which prompts the attack. So a lot of this, I think, can be avoided with proper awareness of people who are living in these areas.
Thank you, sir. I can just take one more question because we have actually quite a number of questions from diverse topics. We have a question: are snares legally allowed? And if not, does the Department of Wildlife or the police take any action against the perpetrators?
It is. It is a illegal thing to hunting is not legal in Sri Lanka. So use of snares is an illegal activity. If the person is caught, they will be prosecuted, and legal action will be taken against them by the Department of Wildlife Conservation. But I think one of the issues is Department of Wildlife Conservation doesn't have enough strength to police large areas because they have limited number of officers. And I think therefore the idea that we've been proposing to them is that they should work together with the police department. I know police department has a lot of other things to work on, but at least the environment police arm of the police department, because they have a much wider presence in the country, and therefore they have a better intelligence network, because a lot of these uh, illegal activities are done by only a certain number of people. So the police has better ways of identifying them and bringing them into, I think, more than trying to uh, punish them. I think what we have to do is try and work with them and try to avoid use of snares. And at the same time, it's not enough to prevent use of snares, because they use the snares as a response to conflict. So unless you resolve the conflict, uh, just preventing them from use of the snares is not going to be an effective solution. So you have to solve that problem from two ends. You have to have a dialogue with them as to why they are using it. If they're using it for hunting purposes, of course, that is not an acceptable thing. But if they're using it as a self-protection or protecting their livestock, then we have to provide them alternative solutions to that, so that we can move them away from use of snares. So it's not a overnight thing that you cannot solve this problem overnight. It has to have a planned approach, but I think wildlife department has to be supported by police as well as the estate. Estate also has their own staff, so I think this has to be something that already some actions have been taken in that direction. Committees are formed between estates, wildlife, and police, but I think we'll have to increase the surveillance, because last 2 months alone we had 3 leopards being killed by snares, which is a rather alarming number.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think I will have to stop taking questions now because we have got quite a few, and I've just chosen the more common ones and maybe the more relevant ones. So I would really like to thank Professor Weerakoon for his very comprehensive talk today, and we're really happy that you came on board with us and you were able to deliver a very comprehensive discussion which actually showed many different sides of this problem, even the social aspects. And thank you very much, sir, for coming on board with us for this inaugural guest talk. I also want to thank our audience today. We appreciate the fact that you're so interested in biology-related matters in the country. And I also would like to apologize that we started a little bit later than we planned due to certain technical issues that we had.
Thank you, Eroja. I really appreciate the opportunity given by IOB to come and give this presentation. And I thank the audience for suffering me for 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Not at all, sir. Thank you. So I'd also like to just give you, the audience, a head up about our next talk, right? So we're going to have another guest talk next week. It's been conducted by Dr. Kirti Mohoti, who is the Deputy Director, Research Production at the Tea Research Institute, Kalawakale. And the topic is Towards Responsible Agriculture Through Good Agricultural Practices. So I really hope that some of you will join us next week as well.